Hey, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to be baking naturally leavened bread consisting of 70% all-purpose einkorn flour and 30% dark rye flour. I'm really excited to be baking this. I've been wanting to do this for a while. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're just going to briefly go over some of the ingredients that we have here to make our bread today. We have our Levain that has doubled in size, has some great activity on top, is bubbling. So we want an active starter to use. Today I'm going to be making this bread with a dark rye that is whole grain, stone ground from Bob's Red Mill. And then we'll be using our standard all-purpose einkorn flour from Jovial as well. I have about 10 grams of fine sea salt here. And then just some tools, your dough whisk, bowl scraper, your digital scale, and some water there in the back. Really all we need to get started. So I'm going to get our starter added to our bowl. I'm going to bring our bowl over here, get it onto our scale. We'll add our water, we'll get it to a nice temperature that we like, and then we'll add our active starter into that. Whisk that around and dissolve it before adding our flours. And we'll do a short Autolyse period, or rather a fermentolyse period, because the starter will be in with the water and the flour. And then we'll soon after that fermentolyse period, we'll add our salt. And we'll get going. So we have everything we need here. We just need to start by adding everything into our bowl. Okay, let's do our water first. And this is just a filtered water that we like to keep in these glass bottles, which are great, by the way. And these rest out. We fill them up and then just leave them on our counter to get rid of any of the chlorine or any of the other things. But they are filtered. So we're going to do 340 grams of water today. And this is about a 68% hydration for this sourdough bread. Good. So here's our water. The next step, we are going to be adding our levain. And here it is. You can kind of see through the glass there, but once I open this up, there we go. You can really start to see nice and active, bubbling. Has a great smell to it. So for this, today, we're going to be doing 125 grams of our starter. So let's add that to the water now. 125 grams. And your starter should be floating. And if it's not ready. Adjustments need to be made. We're very close, a very small amount. That should get us there. There we go. That is what we want to see. And we have some leftover that we can use for discard recipes or to keep it going, depending on how you like to do it. Okay, now that we have our starter added to our water, I am just going to whisk this up. And I also warmed the water up before adding the starter. So I like to target around 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit for my water. And you really don't want to go above 100 degrees. A lot of the wild yeast and bacteria within your starter can get killed if it's too hot. But we do want to try to achieve a target temperature of our final mixed dough. And we can do that by adding warmer water initially when mixing everything together. But also it just helps to kickstart the activity. It helps to dissolve the starter into a nice milky substance, so you don't have, if you have kind of this colder or even room temperature water, the starter can sometimes just remain chunky and not be very helpful to the overall endeavor. So we have our starter dissolved within our water. The next step are to add our flours. So we're going to do our einkorn and our rye flour. We're not going to add salt right away this time. You may have seen in other videos that I've done where if I'm doing 100% einkorn or even just an all-purpose einkorn with a whole wheat einkorn combination, I'll typically just throw the salt in all at the beginning, which is actually not a bad thing for einkorn. Whereas you typically don't want to do that for a traditional sourdough using bread flour. But for this, because we're using the rye and we're using the einkorn, a combination of the two, the 70% einkorn, 30% rye, we're actually going to wait to add the salt because we want to allow this Autolyse period with the starter to sit for 30 to 40 minutes before we add the salt. Otherwise, the salt can actually start to work against us. So let's get started by adding our flours. We're going to start with the all-purpose einkorn flour, and then we're going to do 350 grams of that and 150 grams of our dark rye, and we'll mix those together and get them added into our bowl. All right, so let's start to add our 350 grams of all-purpose einkorn flour into our bowl. And you don't have to do this where you mix the flours separately. I just like to do it to get a little more even consistency when it gets added into our dough mixture. But you can just take the glass bowl with the water and the starter and just start adding all your flours and mix it that way. Okay, we're almost at 350. That should get us there. All right, we're done with the einkorn. Now, let's zero this out and add our rye flour, which we're going to do 150 grams total. And for this, we can just pour this in. 150 grams. There's our 150 grams. So, as you can see, there are 2 flours. Let's move our scale to the side. We can take a whisk and we can just whisk this all together. So all together we have 500 grams total of flour. And given this a nice mixture, it's just really going to combine everything in a way that it's going to make it much easier for this dough to come together and begin the Autolyse period. Okay, that's starting to, I think that looks pretty good for what we need. There it is. Our nice combination of flours there. And we can bring in our mixture and we can now add our flour into our combination of water and discard. Remember, we don't have the salt going in yet. We just want to combine, mix this together, and let it rest. The whole purpose of doing an Autolyse, or again, in this case, this is a fermentolyse because the starter is actually in the water with the flour. The whole purpose of it is you're getting enzyme activity going early and you're letting the flours absorb the water. That's key. And if you throw the salt in a little too early with these type of flours, especially the rye flour, you can slow down the activity. But we want to give it some time to rest. We want these flours to absorb the water and get the activity going. When the water starts to hit these flours, that's when the magic of bread starts to take place and gluten proteins begin to form and create structure and all of that good stuff that we love in our breads. So the point here is we just want to bring this dough together to where all of the dry pieces that you can see around the side of the bowl are completely gone. And you can use your little bowl scraper here to clean off your dough whisk a little bit more before switching over. And then you can just use it to scrape the sides of your bowl to get as much of that dry flour off as possible. And we don't want to knead this necessarily. I'm just making sure I get underneath and I'm seeing, okay, have we covered every inch of this bowl? Have we gotten it to the point where all the dry flour is incorporated into the water, which it is. There we have it. Don't overwork this. We just want to bring it together. We're going to cover this and we're going to let it rest for 30 to 40 minutes. So use some plastic wrap, cling wrap, a towel, whatever you have. I like to use these silicone, food grade silicone covers for my bowls. Get a nice airtight fit. So while this rests for 30 to 40 minutes in its Autolyse period, it's not drying out. It's in a nice environment. And so we can set our timer and we'll see you back here in about 30 to 40 minutes. Okay, we have done 40 minutes to let this Autolyse, and now going to add our 10 grams of salt. So what you can do with this method is just a little bit of salt on top, and then what I'm going to do is actually dip my fingers in some water, not adding a lot of water, but just I'm going to make a few slight indentations into the bread, and then I'm going to pinch it in. So this technique is helpful for incorporating the salt at this stage because we don't really want to knead this. We just want to get the salt incorporated without really providing too much kneading on the actual dough itself. So the pinch method and then folding it over and pinch method again is kind of the way to do that. Some of you might already know or have seen this technique, but I'll show you here. So I'm going to take my hands, dip it in some water here, just the tips of my fingers really. Again, don't want to add a lot of water. And then I'm just going to very gently place a few indentations into the dough, like so. There we go. You can see here, kind of looks like a honeycomb almost. And then I am just going to sprinkle our salt. Again, about 10 grams of salt. There we go. And you can take some of that water, wet your hands, and I am just going to grab and pinch, grab and pinch, grab and pinch, and then I'm going to get underneath and fold that over. Same with this other side over here. Get underneath. Try to get underneath as well as we can. And then I'm going to pinch again. Pinch again. Pinch again. And then I want to fold that over again. Pinch. 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 I'm going to pinch it this direction. Again, the whole point, just want to get this salt incorporated into our dough. Let's do another set. Add a little bit more water on my hand. Pinch again, pinch again, pinch again. Try to get any parts off the side. Pinch again. We'll just do this one last time. A little bit of water on the hands. We don't want it water dripping, so we can let it drip off here and then come back over, pinch, 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 pinch. There, I think I like that. And so now we're at the point where we have a nice dough ball. Again, try not to knead this. And I'm just going to let this rest in the bowl now for a portion of our bulk ferment. And this can be anywhere, depending on the ambient temperature of your home, to about 2 to 4 hours. So the warmer your ambient temperature, it's going to happen much quicker. The cooler, it's going to be a little slower. So you really have to just watch and pay attention to your dough on this period, because einkorn, we're only using 70% rather than 100%, but regardless, with einkorn's flour specifically, we don't want to, you can easily overproof this. And if you do that, you're not going to have a very good oven spring. And einkorn's difficult already to get what would traditionally be known as a nice rise or an oven spring when you go to bake it. And so you just want to watch this. We're aiming for 30 to 40% rise over 2 to 4 hours. And so that means that we don't want to see a lot of bubbles. We don't want to see a ton of airiness. We don't want this to double in size like a lot of recipes call for. And so again, we want to target 30 to 40% rise before we can move on to the shaping. And we'll do a shaping and we'll let it do a final proof toward the end when it goes into the Banneton basket at room temperature. And then we will bake it later this evening. So this isn't one of those traditional sourdough recipes where you do a super long ferment. You can, but I like to do mine where I build the levain the night before, bake the day after in the evening. And you can do a cold ferment in the fridge with einkorn, and it's something that I like to do because there's a lot of really good benefits of the longer cold ferment in your refrigerator. And I'm actually a big fan of that. For this particular dough, though, I am going to just bake it this evening. And you're still getting all the wonderful benefits of naturally leavened bread with using your own starter. There's still all these wonderful things where it's digesting, it's doing pre-digesting for you. It's easier on the gut. There's a lot of benefits to it. If you do want to do a cold ferment with this, you can. I would just say to do it for a shorter period of time because, again, with einkorn flour, it's less forgiving if you overproof it. And you can absolutely overproof it to the point where there's no turning back and it's not going to be a good bread. So err on the side of caution. If you normally do, say, 14 or more hours in a cold ferment in the fridge, I would shorten that with this dough to about 8 hours, anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. I would not go much further than that. And be careful to do your finger test. If you put an indent into the dough, you can always check. You want the dough to indent and slowly return back. If it doesn't return at all, that's not good. If it returns too quick, it's not done yet. But you don't want to overdo it. So just be mindful of that. You can do a cold ferment. I am just going to bake this evening, and it's going to be wonderful. And I'm still going to get all of the benefits. It's still sourdough. You're still getting all those benefits. But a long cold ferment mainly strengthens the gluten, which einkorn doesn't have a lot of gluten, and it provides additional flavor compounds from the acetic acid and lactic acid and things like that. So einkorn's just a little different. We have to remember we're using this einkorn flour. It has its own unique properties to it and its own methods of doing the sourdough. So I'll stop there. I'm going to cover this back up and we're going to let this go until it rises for 30 to 40%. So one last look before we cover this up. Got a nice, you're going to get that kind of golden color from the einkorn, but we have the dark rye in there. So this is going to be a beautiful bread when it bakes up. I can't wait. And delicious. These two flours really complement each other. You get more of that earthiness, nuttiness from the einkorn, but you have more of that tang coming from the rye. A very nice balance. And nutritionally, both are very good to eat. And this is just going to be a wonderful bread. So let's get it covered up. And then we can go and take care of whatever else we need to do around the house. So this really doesn't take a whole lot of effort. You can still go on about your day and do all the things you need to do. A lot of this is just time. Time is an ingredient when making naturally leavened bread. And it's very important to watch, take very good account of where it sits right now versus when we come back, and how much has it risen? Does it look like we're at that 30 to 40%? So be sure to pay careful attention to your loaf, and we'll be back. Okay, we have spent about 3.5 hours, and although this usually bubbles up a lot if you let this ferment for a long time, and we just have a slight doming here, and we've risen about 40% to a point where now we want to get this out. I'm gonna lightly flour our surface here and get this dough out, and then we'll just shape it into a kind of a loose ball, and then we're gonna cover it and let it rest for about 30 minutes and do a bench rest. Here is the dough. So it's definitely grown, but it's not airy. You're not seeing a ton of bubbles, and that's a good thing. We don't want to see a lot of that at this stage because we do not want to overproof the dough. We want to make sure we leave plenty for the oven spring that we're going to eventually get to here. But I am going to just lightly flour the surface, and then we're going to get this dough out onto this flat surface here so that we can, again, do just a light, loose ball and let it do a bench rest. You don't need to use a ton of flour, but we do want to make it so that it's not going to stick to this surface. All right, so we got our loaf out onto our flat surface here. I'm just going to add a little bit of flour to the bowl scraper and bench scraper here that I have. And again, we just kind of want to form this into a loose ball. And that looks pretty good. We just want this to rest for a little bit. I'm going to give this about 15 minutes to do a bench rest. And what I'm going to use for that to cover it is just another bowl. You can use a towel, whatever else works in your house. So go ahead and get this covered. We just don't want it to catch a draft. Set a timer for 15 minutes and we'll be back. Okay, we are done with our 15 minutes bench rest. And you can see this is relaxed quite a bit. And so now the next step is we are going to use our bench scraper here to help bring up each of the 4 sides of our bread into the middle. We're going to kind of stretch it up and over, and then we're going to flip the entire dough ball around and start to shape it. And once we get it shaped, it's going to go into our pre-floured banneton basket here. And then we're going to let it do an additional and final ferment before we bake it. And in the meantime, while it's resting and doing its last ferment in the banneton, we will start preheating our oven and our Dutch oven. So one thing to keep in mind is with this recipe, we didn't do a lot of folds, right? You're probably used to the idea of a stretch and fold with sourdough. Einkorn, you really don't want to stretch and fold too much or too vigorously because the gluten structure is just far different. And so the goal is really not to be stretching it or kneading it a whole lot. And so in the beginning, you'll remember when I added the salt, we did the pinch and folds. And for me, within roughly the first hour to 45 minutes of that ferment period, that is what I'm considering the folds for this recipe because I'm just doing very light folding and letting this bread do what it does from an einkorn perspective, which is just very different from many. So keep that in mind. We're just going to finish this off here. I'm going to use just a little bit of the flour that we have to dust the sides of this. We don't want to put a ton on the bread or in the middle. Just putting a little on the side so that I can use some on my hands when we do the shaping, or I can use some to get on top of this bench scraper as we work. So you'll kind of feel here, you can get some of this flour underneath the dough and just make sure it's not sticking too much to the bottom, which is something we definitely don't want. But once you start to feel it kind of sliding under there nicely, like so, and getting some of that flour under there, then what we can start to do is pull. Actually, I'm going to get a little flour on my hand here, because I'm going to go underneath, pull, and then bring to the center just like this. And we're going to do the same on this side here. So we're going to go under, and we're going to do this on each side of the dough and bring it to the center. Do a little more flour over on this side. Get underneath. Bring this up and over. And bring this last little piece up and over. There we go. Just like that. So now we kind of have this ball that we are going to get to work with. And what the next goal is, we're going to take this and flip it over onto its side. And with that in mind, we can add just a little bit of flour on top so it doesn't stick too much. We'll flip this over and then begin the shaping process. Okay, so let's continue this. We're going to flip that over just like that. There we go. And we want to be as gentle as we can without squeezing down too much on the dough. We don't want to push the gases out. We want to be very gentle. And so I'm going to add some more flour around the sides and on top. And ultimately, this is going to be where we start to do our shaping. And so the shaping of einkorn is probably a little different than what you're normally used to. And so there's a movement here that you'll see with my hands where I use one free hand and then I'll use the bench scraper, and we start to get it into this nice taut ball. And eventually you can stop using the bench scraper entirely and just use your hands. And we just want to make sure that none of it starts to stick to your hand. And so you can always dip your hands in and start to turn. And what you'll notice is this top is going to start to create tension. And you're going to get a tighter, rounded top this way. And that's the goal. That's what we're going for. Is you spin it enough times that the entire dough ball sits the way we want it to. And again, don't be shy about using more flour for the sides. There, we're getting there. This is almost to the point where we want it. And then we're going to drop it into our banneton basket. So put a little more on the side. We'll do one final turn. Before getting it into our basket here. And some of that just knocked off the side. So add a little more there. Have this ready to go. There we go. Now we have our bread in our basket, and you can sprinkle some dough on top and a little on the sides. This is where this is going to rest and live for its final bulk. And so we're going to take our plastic bag here. I'm going to set this down. And we're just going to do a simple tie on this. And then I flatten the sides so that there's air that comes up, because we don't want any of this plastic to touch our dough. But even if it does, it'll be okay because we floured the top of it, so it shouldn't stick. So I'm going to leave this at room temperature. We're going to put it off to the side for anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. You can do your indent test to make sure it's where you want it. And then we will obviously start to preheat the oven, start preheating our Dutch oven, and we'll go from there. All right, we are at the point where we have preheated our Dutch oven. This is piping hot. We've had it at about 475 for going on 45 minutes. preheating in the oven. And so now we just need to take our bread, which we have here, out of the Banneton basket and get it placed onto our parchment paper so that we can then score it. So here is our bread. And now we're just gonna rest this out onto the parchment. And you can tap this a few times. And there is our bread. So we are going to take our bread lamb now and very simply just do a quick score at the top. Not too big. Keep it relatively small. And now we're going to set this off to the side here. Being very careful not to cut yourself. And I'm actually just going to cut this parchment paper a little bit. And there we go. There's our bread. I'm going to plop this right into our Dutch oven. And then we'll be careful not to burn ourselves. Add our lid back on. And we are now going to get this in the oven. Okay, let's open this up. We're just going to add this in the middle. Then I'm going to set a timer for about 25 minutes, at which point we will take the lid off. All right, it is time to get this out of the oven. Let's see how we do, shall we? And there's our beautiful bread. Looks incredible. Now, we just need to get our bread out onto our cooling rack so that it can start cooling for hour and a half, 2 hours before cutting into it. But it smells and looks amazing. So let's get this out of here. I'll just set it right here. And then from here, pretty simple. All we want to do is just slide this out from underneath and set that aside. And there is our beautiful 70% einkorn, 30% rye sourdough boule. Incredible. So let's let it rest. We'll be back in a couple hours. Okay, we made it to the best part of making your own bread at home. The point at which we get to cut into this and try it out for ourselves. But this is how we did. It's a gorgeous loaf. And this one is a little smaller than I normally make for my einkorn boules. I normally do about 540 grams of flour total, and this one was about 500. So just a little smaller, but a really good size to eat throughout the week. Nice, delicious coloring. Just beautiful coloring from that dark rye that we have with the einkorn. Just incredibly attractive looking loaf. Can't wait to bite into this. That's really all we have left to do. Good sound here, and just smells wonderful. So did a great job. Let's get to one of the best parts. Let's cut this up. So grab your best bread knife. This is mine. Let's get to it. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing cut up. Grab it here and just go right down the center. There we are. Almost there. There we are. Now let's take a look at how we did. That looks so good. And the smell, delicious smell of the rye, but you have that very characteristic einkorn smell in there as well. Looks great. Let's cut us off another little slice here. There we go. There we go. We put this here. And let's see how we did. I can't wait to try this. Got a nice crumb. Slice this in half here. Perfect size for the toaster. Looks and smells great. I'm going to toast this up so we can give it a bite. All right. So I have some toasted bread here. I'm just going to put a little butter on each one so we can get a nice taste test going. It's one of my favorite ways to taste test the bread I just made so that we can analyze it and see how well we did. And that's still pretty hot out of the toaster. So there we have it. Looks and smells great. Let's have a bite. Wow. Excellent flavor. The crust is the best. Wow. I haven't tasted a crust like that in a while. Wow, the combination of the einkorn with the dark rye flour, you really have to give this one a try. It's so unique, so delicious, but the crust is out of this world. The crumb is great too. Don't get me wrong, it's all tasty. But for the fans of the crust out there, this is next level. This is not going to last very long. Thanks for watching as always, guys. This is so fun to do at home. Make your own bread, tasty bread, delicious sourdough, naturally leavened with our own starter, clean ingredients, excellent flavor that's very hard to beat. I'm going to have to just continue eating this, but I really appreciate you guys watching, following, all your comments, everybody following and sharing the videos. I really appreciate that. This is just so much fun to do, and I hope you get to do this at home one day if you haven't already. But I think the 70% einkorn, 30% rye was a wonderful way to approach this bread. I am very pleased with how this turned out, and I hope everybody keeps baking out there and making delicious things at home, and I really appreciate you following and watching along. So have a great day. I'm going to continue to chow down on this delicious homemade, naturally leavened bread.